Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading Machiavelli's Discourses. Today we are continuing Book 2, today looking at Chapter 18. And Chapter 18 title is How by the authority of the Romans and by the example of the ancients, military infantry should be esteemed more than horses. Again, this chapter is looking at the question of looking at the ancient history and the role of infantry. Now, we should look at the Prince. The Prince, in the Prince, we should, but in the Prince, he makes the argument explaining why Italian infantry, why the mercenaries at the Concade that dominated the Italian political and military scene at the time Machiavelli's writing, why it happened. Okay, he has account. Go check the Prince out there for that account on mercenaries. Was it why mercenary arms are no good? Right. That's right. 12, chapter 12, right? When mercenary arms, why they're no good, and the account of why that's the case. Now, and the reason was mostly because you couldn't, it basically produced, you had smaller groups, you couldn't do a lot with a small group of infantry, so therefore you went with horse, and therefore the predominant of horse and almost no infantry, right? Well, he's going to make the argument is that no, we should not. This is repeating. This is giving a more detailed exam of that theme of that question that was addressed in the Prince. So let's go look at this. It can be clearly demonstrated by many reasons and many examples how much more the Romans esteemed the military on foot than on horseback in all their military actions. On it they founded all their plans of their forces, as is seen by the many examples, among others when they fought with the Latins near Lake Regillus, or when the Roman army was already bending, they made their men on horseback dismount on foot to relieve it, and by renewing the fight in this way had the victory, right? So let's go. Not literally a French word, but a Gallism. Hold on, that's the wrong word. This is over here. This is from Livy 2, Book 2, 20. So, the Romans are manifestly seen here to have trusted in them more than they when they were on foot than when they were kept on horseback. In other words, the Romans, they trust their cavalry more on foot than on horseback. They used this same extreme in many other fights and always found it the best remedy for their dangers. In other words, it wasn't, the Romans didn't rely on their cavalry, but rather mobile infantry. Right? They were trusted their cavalry to be more on foot. So therefore, they weren't basically, they were mostly more used as not as cavalry but as mobile infantry. Nor should one oppose to this the opinion of Hannibal, who, on seeing that the consuls in the battle of Cannae had made their cavalrymen dismount on foot, make a joke of such a policy, saying, "Qua malum vintus milis tradenta equites." That is, I should prefer that they have given them to me bound. Right? Again, quoted from Livy 22:49, except where Livy Latin means how I would have preferred that they have given me bound. The Machiavelli's Latin means how I would prefer that they had given the cavalry to me bound. Right. So again, this is. Even, in other words, the idea is he'd rather, it's a joke saying he'd rather have the cavalry to him. It would have been more preferable that they were on the horse, right? In that sense. Because they would have been bound, he said. even though this opinion may have been in the mouth of a very excellent man. Nonetheless, if one has to follow authority, one should believe in a Roman Republic. One should believe in a Roman Republic, and so many very excellent captains who were in it more than in one of Hannibal alone. In other words, if you're going to rest on authority, you should rest on the range of authority, and that it's therefore the Romans who did this tradition of way of fighting, of treating preferring to have the infantry, the cavalry, or fight as infantry, and preferring infantry conflict as the routine, right? This is to trust in more authorities. Even without authorities, there are manifest reasons for this. So therefore, authority supports this argument, and then there's other reasons. For a man on foot can go many places where a horse cannot go. He can be taught to observe order, and that he has to resume it if he is disturbed. It is difficult to make horses observe order, and impossible to reorder them if they are disturbed. In other words, horses are not, human beings are more, can go places horses cannot go, and the horse, once the horse is disturbed or shocked or things, it's more difficult to control than a human being, he's saying. It's difficult once they're disturbed. Besides this, as in men, some horses are found that have little spirit and some that have much spirit. And often it happens that a spirited horse is ridden by a cowardly man, and a cowardly horse is by a spirited man. And in whatever mode this disparity occurs, from it arises useless and disorder. In other words, he then puts a problem to horse. You don't always, as with men, so too with horses. Some are spiritedly, some are cowardly. And the danger comes when you have a spirited man on a cowardly horse and a coward on a spirited horse. This creates a disorder, he says. Ordered infantry can easily break horse, and only with difficulty be defeated by them. So therefore, ordered infantry can be break, and it can easily break horse, where a horse can only very difficultly defeat ordered infantry. Beside many ancient and modern examples, this opinion is corroborated by the authority of those who give rules for civil things, where they show that at first war began to be made with horse, since there was yet no order of infantry. So therefore, the civic, those who give the accounts of civic things, rules for civic things, show that at first wars began with horse. Why? Because they didn't have infantry. But when they were put in order, it was known that how much more useful they were than the former. In other words, infantry is more useful than once you order infantry and train men to fight in infantry warfare. It is not so, however, that because of this, horses are not necessary in armies to perform reconnaissance, to raid, to prey on countries, to follow enemies where they are in fight, and to be also part of the opposition to horse of the adversaries. In other words, they're not useless. You need them. You can't. He's not saying that there's no role for cavalry, but they have a very specific role, and he defines it. He says, they're reconnaissance, raiding, preying. In other words, hunting down the countries. In other words, raiding areas and doing like that. To follow the enemy where they're in flight, so chasing the enemy down, and to be also in part of the opposition of horse and counter horse. But the foundation and the shoes of the army, the foundation and the snooze, the fundamental part, and that which should be esteemed more, should be the infantry. So again, he makes the count here for supremacy of infantry. against that of the cavalry. As you know, in the previous chapter, he addressed the artillery question. Now he's addressing the infantry question versus cavalry, right? Among the sins of the Italian princes, which I have that have made it servile towards foreigners, there is none greater than having taken little account of this order, infantries, right? And having turned all one's care to the military on horseback, right? In other words, he's saying that this is what he repeats from the prince. This order has arisen from the malignity of the heads and from the ignorance of those who held states. For since the Italian military was transferred 25 years ago to men who did not hold states, but were like captains of fortune, not fortuna, ventures, like, you know, ventura, not fortuna, captains of ventures, they at once thought of how they could maintain their reputation while staying armed themselves with the princes unarmed, right? So therefore, this idea that they were not, the military was not given to the head of state; it was to military to someone who had reputation, right? That they had they were like captains of ventures, right? Since a large number of infantrymen could not be continually paid by them, and they did not have subjects they could avail themselves on, and a small number did not give them reputation, they turned to keeping horse. Right? This repeats what he said in the Prince. For 200 or 300 horse that were paid by the condottieri maintained his reputation, and the payment was not much. It was not such that it could not be fulfilled by men who held states. In other words, it was reasonable. In other words, the way the Italians preferred their military, that you couldn't pay a lot of soldiers, you didn't have enough resources to do it yourself. You had to rely on people paying you. The people who held states could, they could afford the Concadi who had these couple hundred horses, 200 or 300 horses, right? So that this would continue more easily, and so as to maintain their reputation, they removed all affection and reputation of infantry and transferred it to horse. In other words, they took the reputation of this and they emphasized the cavalry better and things. They increased so much in this disorder that the largest army, whenever the least part, in the largest army, whatever the least part was infantry, the smallest number. Right? This usage, together with many other disorders that were mixed with it, made the Italian military weak in such a mode that this province has been easily trampled on by all the ultramontanes, those more over the mountains, or the French, in a sense, and the Germans, or whoever. This error of esteeming horse more than infantry is shown more openly by another Roman example. Okay, right? This is in other words, he says the error of esteeming horse more than. When the Romans were encamped at Sora, a crowd of horse came out of the town to assault the camp. And the Roman master of the horse was against them with his cavalry and met them chest to chest. Fate had it that in the first encounter, the head of both armies died, while the other while the others remained without government and fight continued nevertheless. The Romans dismounted on foot so as to overcome the enemy more easily and constrained the enemy cavalry to do likewise, if they wished to defend themselves. Because of this, the Romans brought back the victory. Now, again, this is Livy 9:22. No example could be greater than this in demonstrating how much more virtue there is in infantry than horse. For if in the other struggles the consuls made the Roman cavalry dismount, it was to relieve the infantry who were suffering and need of aid. But in this place they dismounted neither to succor, assist the infantry, nor to combat the enemy men on foot. Right. In other words, it wasn't. This example was in other words, they were fighting horses, horse against horse. They had there was no infantry there to fight, so therefore they didn't have to come to the aid of their infantry, and they didn't have to go fight other infantry. But were combating on horseback against horse. They judged that while they could not overcome them on horseback, they could more easily defeat them by dismounting. I wish thus to conclude that ordered infantry cannot be overcome without the very great difficulty, unless by other infantry, right? And Roman Crassus and Mark Antony ran through the dominions of the Parthians for many days, with very few horse and very many infantry, and had numerous horse of the Parthians against them. Crassus, with part of the army, was left there dead. Mark Antony virtuously saved himself. Nevertheless, in these Roman afflictions, it is seen how much infantry prevailed over horse. For being in the extensive country, where mountains are rare, rivers very rare, the rivers far away, the seas far away, and distance from every advantage, Mark Antony, nonetheless, in the judgment of the Parthians themselves, virtuously saved himself. Nor did all the Parthian cavalry ever dare try the ranks of his army. If Crassus was left there, whoever will read well of his actions will see that it was by deception rather than by force. Nor did the Parthians ever, in all their disorder, dare push against him. Instead, always skirting around him, impeding his supplies, making promises, not observing them. And this led him to an extreme misery. So again, it wasn't that. Now the Parthian example is an interesting example. He says it was not a victory; it's a defeat. But it wasn't because of the superiority of the Parthian cavalry. The Parthians were, as I said, the territory was steeps, and it was no mountains, no things like this, and therefore, but still, even then. In other words, Antony got out, and even Crassus, who is captured, is not because the Parthians overcame his force in that way, but rather tricked him and deceived him into making the wrong decisions and put him in an untenable situation. So, what is this? This is 5. Plutarch's Antony and Crassus, right? Crassus had only 4,000 cavalry, according to Plutarch, and Antony had 16,000, right? So therefore, different number of cavalry, right? Not knowing their order of combat, he went to encounter them with his horse, presuming that he could break them at once. But finding them immovable, and having lost many of his men, he withdrew. Being a very able man. Oh, sorry. I'm jumping ahead. Sorry. No. Okay. This is that the Roman Crassus and Antony ran through the dominion of this for many days, and horses on many infantry. Where's the line of extreme misery? This is where we left off. Checking the note, right? That he was saying that Crassus was left there because of that. 4. Next paragraph. I would believe I had to undergo more labor in arguing, persuading. Right. He's arguing. Literature is persuading. In persuading how much the virtual infantry is more powerful than that of horse, if it were not very, modern, many modern examples of it. That render every full testimony for it. In other words, 9,000 Swiss had been seen in Novara, cited by us above, to go and to confront 10,000 horse, as many infantrymen, and defeat them, for the horse could not take the offense against them, and they had very little, little esteemed the infantry, because they were in a good part Gascon's troops in badly ordered. In other words, these troops were badly ordered in that sense. Then 26,000 Swiss were seen to go above Milan to meet Francis, King of France, who had with him 20,000 horse, 40,000 infantry, and 100 artillery wagons. And if they did not win the battle as at Novara, they did combat virtuously for 2 days, and then, when they were defeated, half of them saved themselves. Again, this is the Battle of Monterrego. So therefore, even if they, didn't defeat, like they didn't triumph at Novara, this battle they still saved themselves, right? In other words, half of them. They were saved. They were enough to save half of their army, right? Marcus Regulus Antonius Antilius presumed with his infantry to stand up against not horse but elephants. And if his plan did not succeed, it was not because of the virtue of his infantry, was not so much that he could trust in it so much as to believe that it could overcome that difficulty, right? Again, this is Polybius 1, 33, 34. In other words, that this other example of this, they stood up not only against horse, but also elephants, right? But then they broke, right? This plan, and if his plan did not succeed, it was not because of the virtue of his infantry. It was that that he could trust it so much as to believe it could overcome difficulty. I repeat, therefore, that to overcome ordered infantrymen is necessary to oppose them with infantrymen better ordered than they. Otherwise, one goes to a manifest loss. In the time of Filippo Visconti, Duke of Milan, about 16,000 Swiss descended in Lombardy, where the Duke, having Camilingola, then for his captain, set him about 1,000 horse and a few infantrymen against them. Again, this is 9. Gilbert gives Camillingola under 3,000 cavalry on the basis of 1531 Florentine edition, and because 1,000 seems too few for 16,000 enemies, right? In other words, that Gilbert changes this number, but this is the most Machiavelli number in that sense. Not knowing their order of combat, he went to encounter them with his horse, presuming he could break them at once. But finding them immovable and having lost many men, he withdrew. Being a very able man and knowing how to take up new policies among new accidents, he recovered more troops and went to meet them. Coming against them, he made all his men of arms dismount on foot and put them at the head of his infantry, and went to beset the Swiss. They did not have any remedy, for since men-at-arms of Camingola's were on foot and were well armed, they could easily enter the ranks of the Swiss without suffering any damage. And having entered among them, they could easily attack them. So that for all their numbers, there remained alive only a part that was presumed by the humanity of Carmangola, right? This is the idea. This is at the Battle of Arbadell in 422. In other words, he went in there and he ultimately defeated them because why? He put his men of arms better armored, and they were the front of the units, and they came into the Swiss and able to do the most damage. they could easily attack, he says, and of all their number there remained alive a part that was preserved by the humanity. In other words, of that. So in other words, this is an example of what is that how they the Swiss were allowed to surrender in that sense. I believe that many know the difference of virtue. I believe that many know the difference of virtue that is there between the one and the other of these orders. In other words, the cavalry and the infantry. I believe many know the difference. But so great is the unhappiness of these times that neither ancient examples nor modern nor confessions of error is sufficient to make modern princes repent. So in other words, modern rulers are constantly doing this. They're not going to, they know the better of infantry, but they still prefer the congarde and the horsemen. It's very difficult for them to repent. They should think that if they wish to bestow reputation on military for a province or a state, it is necessary to resuscitate these orders, the Roman orders of infantry warfare, and keep them near them, give them reputation, give them life, so that they bestow both life and reputation on him. Right? This is, again, he shifts the thing from the plural to singular, right? To him. In other words, he talks about things in general, and then switch it to the specific, the particular, singular, right? To him. That they bestow life and reputation on him, the one who does this. So this idea that, who is this person? That isn't Machiavelli really? Machiavelli is one of Machiavelli's talking about himself to a great degree here, because if you read his Art of War and you saw what he did, he tried to teach the the Florentine Republic to trade a militia infantry. In other words, create citizen soldiers, to create a situation. Now, this was really frowned upon when the Medici returned to their old ways. In other words, the various republic leaders, the mercenary captains, and the rulers of the various Italian states tended to prefer the mercenaries, the horse, and because of that, they were mostly horse, right? And this is why he says this. He doesn't. He says, listen, it's the modern princes do not repent their sins. It is rather whoever does this, who wants to restore this reputation. They should, it will get, if they want to reserve this thing of this, they have to resuscitate these orders. And in many, he's pointing at himself here. I'm sorry. This is we have to understand a little bit here, because he himself is one trying to restore these orders. And as they deviate from these modes, so they deviate from the other modes spoken above. In other words, anyone who's going to deviate from relying on the cavalry and to rely on the mercenary arms, right? This is going to be, they're going to deviate from the other modes. So this is the new mode in order, right? They're going to no longer rely on the existing modes. So as they deviate from these modes, so they deviate from the other modes spoken above. So, in other words, the over-reliance on artillery, in other words, things he talked to earlier in that sense. Hence it arises that acquisitions are for the harm, not the greatness of a state, as will be said below. So therefore you have to be, so acquisitions are for harm sometimes. So you can, in other words, if you don't do these modes and don't reform these things, acquisitions can be, hence it arises that acquisitions are for the harm, not the greatness of a state. So therefore, and, again, remember, the Roman example is acquiring leads to the greatness, but then he's going to give us a counter example in the next chapter, he says, of how acquisitions are for the harm, not the greatness of a state. And that's what he will say this next. Well, we're going to stop here. Please have your questions and comments and the thing, and I'll respond to them when I see them. If you like it, hit the like button. It helps the algorithm. If you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing. And encourage friends to come check out the channel. If you liked it and you want to share it far and wide. Share it in your social media. Share it to your friends. Encourage your friends to check out the channel and subscribe as well. Again, commenting, liking, sharing, and subscribing all help the algorithm to get so people can find things more clearly. If you didn't like it, you can always thumbs down, but say why in the comments so people can benefit and learn something. Maybe if you're right now, it will help people, right? Another thing you do is you can check out social media, links below. If you want to know more about me as a scholar, researcher, check out the research below, the academic social media links below. And if you want to help me do what I do, you can do so through Patreon or Subscribestar, links below. And if you're, you can buy one of my books. If you want to do another way, the books listed below. You can do so through your local bookstore, online distributors like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, whatever, and or the publishers themselves. And of course, there's an ebook available that's listed as well. So therefore, that's it. We'll check you on chapter 19 next. Take care and have a great day.